because, first of all, they feel it labels their food, and their food is quite different. Each is different from the next. You know, if you didn't know where you were and the dishes came out from Alinea or El Bulli or Fat Duck, I could tell by the time the first dish came out, certainly by the second dish, you could tell where you were. And it's sort of an unfriendly name, but it's the only name that the press has had, and no one has offered another one. So I argue modernist cuisine is both one that intellectually fits because of this whole issue of criticism and aesthetic theory, and I think it fits in a more general sense. The people say, yeah, it's modern food. And just as modern architecture ranges from very practical modern skyscrapers in Manhattan to things like Frank Gehry's museum in Bilbao, which are beautiful but not necessarily as practical, the same thing's true here. So, long answer to a short question. Yes?
So is there a postmodern?
So it turns out that some people call this, the question is there a postmodern? And in my feeling, the answer is no. The way artistic movements typically have worked in art or architecture is that modernism wasn't a single point in time. It was a whole series of things. So the French Impressionists were one of the earliest and best known avant-garde groups. But they were supplanted by tons of other groups. There was Dada and Surrealism and Cubism and Abstract Expressionism and Minimalism. And there's dozens or hundreds of different schools, all within this notion of modernism. And it's only when that whole thing had run its course over a period of something like 100 years that, in fact, you got the first genuine postmodernism. Because modernism itself was mature enough you could have that reflection back. And so when people call this food postmodern, I argue in this gastronomical article that what they're simply doing is they're taking a name they've heard some other place and they're just applying it. I don't think it structurally fits from an aesthetic theory point of view. But hey, I'm a physicist and kind of a cook, not an art historian, so you should take a different view. Another question? Yeah?
So this is 2,400 pages, which means you were able to put a lot of things in it. But my guess is you still wanted another 2,400 pages. What is the outtake you regret the most?
It was something of yours I cut, Ivan. No. You know, there's precious little evidence that we drew the line anywhere, given that it's 2,400 pages. In fact, we did. There are lots of things that we squeezed in last minute. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, actually, that we've been compiling, experiments we've been doing since the book came out. We're also aware of the fact we didn't treat pastry, baking, and dessert. Volume 5, our plated dish recipes, are mostly in a traditional aesthetic. So they're mostly not really hardcore. We've got lots of hardcore modernist dishes throughout the rest of the book, but our final plated dish recipes really aren't as much. So if I had one thing to do, it would be to do a volume 6 that was another 50 or 100 great dishes in a really strongly modernist style. And maybe we'll get to that someday, or maybe not. When people say, what's next, it's always very funny to me because they ask me in contexts like this where I want to say, this is what's next. I have to stand up and talk to people about the book. Yes?
Nathan, 2 or 3 years from now, the impact of this book will be more clear. Looking ahead, what do you think the impact will be?
Well, you know, what we hoped to do was take a ton of knowledge that the other people had developed in lots of disparate places and bring it together in one place where it would be straightforward to learn it. Some people will start at page 1, volume 1, and go all the way through. Some people will go in other orders. So we really hope people find that useful. And that people from a whole variety of different approaches find it useful. You know, this is not just about super modern aesthetic, it's also about very traditional aesthetic, but it's about teaching this whole set of ideas. And the reason that we did the book is I realized that there was a need for this. There's a foundation for 21st century gastronomy that was out there, but it was very inaccessible. And so I thought, hey, it'll take 10 years or more for conventional publishers to get around to doing it. We can accelerate that. So that's what I hope we do. And as you say, only time will tell whether that really works out. Yes?
From the topics that you treat in the book, which represented the most challenging in terms of understanding?
So that's a really good question. Some of the stuff I understood for a long time because I was a physicist. So heat diffusion, how heat moves through food. By the way, that's also how salt moves through food. When you make a ham or you brine something, it's also a slow diffusion process. So that was something I was familiar with as a physicist. The challenge there was how to explain it in a way that was really accessible to people. And we tried really hard to do that, and only time will tell. There are other things that were just mysteries we had to figure out. In barbecue, there's this thing called the stall. If you cook a pork shoulder, a whole hog, or a brisket, the temperature rises, and then it plateaus for periods of hours. And then it'll go back up again. And if you look on the internet, there's thousands of pages devoted to the stall, discussing it, explaining it, arguing about it, lots of theories. They're all wrong. And so we figured out what causes the barbecue stall. And then we did a definitive experiment to prove that's what caused it. And so that was a cool thing. We didn't set out to do it, but it just sort of happened while we were reading the book. Yes?
Did you find that the cooking equipment that you found in the marketplace is up to the modernist level that's needed in order to execute menus on a day-to-day basis?
The answer is yes and no. So there's a variety of equipment that is great. Almost all of it could use some improvement. We're pretty candid about what things need to be improved in them. So I've cooked with combi ovens for 15 years. And combi ovens are great, but there's a bunch of ways that I think they could be greater if you're using it for this technique. Particularly their temperature accuracy at low temperature is not really very good. We don't cook fish in a combi oven because the temperature swings are too big. So we use a water bath for that. Things like water baths work great, but they're expensive. And they're sort of needlessly expensive. They're made for scientists, pharmaceutical companies are the main customer. They're very price insensitive. The price needs to come down, and the price is coming down. That's the good news. There are some other areas. Home ovens don't have anything like a combi oven. That's not quite true. They're just starting. Gaggenau and Miele and Viking are all looking at adding combi oven-like features to home ovens. But it doesn't have to be expensive. You can have a tabletop thing like a tabletop convection oven or basically a toaster oven that would have good temperature control and let you steam omelets. And that should be a $150 thing. And it doesn't exist yet. So there's a bunch of areas where we're hoping that by publicizing stuff and creating some demand, people will rise to the occasion and change the equipment a bit. One more question, okay?
What was the most fun for you, personally?
The thing that was the most fun ultimately was seeing the whole thing come together. When you have a team of people working on software, it turns out when you write software for yourself, you have one person doing it, it's usually not as good as when a small team works on it. Because in this book, there's a bunch of places where I would have drawn a line and said, no, we don't need to do that. But somebody else on the team felt really strongly about it. So Anjana felt really strongly about the curry map. And there's a bunch of pictures that Ryan took that I would have said, don't bother. But no, he really wanted the best of that. And I am just stunned at what the team created. So that was really the most fun for me. The least fun, by the way, is proofreading. Proofreading 2,400 pages is a good reason not to create 2,400 pages.